was consummated, there had to be some discord within the organization. There had to be someone who wasn't on board. And listen, we're not in the business of speculation, but I'm just talking logically. Because if they knew what they wanted to do after they were finished, because listen, he had the interview on Tuesday and Wednesday. You guys, we thought we'd find out something yesterday, and lo and behold, it's another couple of days after the interviews were over. So, what went on in those discussions, and who wasn't completely on board? So much so that it took this long to consummate the deal. And listen, I know how the Cowboys work. Prepare for this. There will be talk about they were trying to get the staff together. They were trying to do other things to put this all in place, and none of that adds up. Because you could make the announcement and have Schottenheimer work on getting the staff together, and they still could have done it in the same timing because you knew you had the weekend coming up regardless, right? So if that comes up, I'm not buying it, and I'm saying that now and not after the fact. I want to get your thoughts in terms of how long it took between interview and consummation of deal.
But Joe, let me just say something about the interview. You're interviewing someone who's already in the building.
Right.
I don't
3 years.
know. I don't know how much more you would find out in an interview that you wouldn't have already known over the 3 years that the man has worked for you. It's one thing to bring someone in, fly someone in from New York for a job here at WFAA, but if we're promoting Joe Trahan, don't we know what we're getting with Joe Trahan because we work with him every day and we see him every day already?
Which has happened, by the way.
Yeah, it has.
It has happened. But no, you're right. You make a great point, Chris. And I do think that points to the fact of, okay, what exactly did Brian Schottenheimer do as the quote unquote offensive coordinator? We know he didn't call plays, right? We know that Mike McCarthy was responsible for the offense. So maybe that's why it took 2 days for them to have this interview, which again, I thought it was interesting, the timing of the way that played out. What about you, Mike?
I mean, all of it smacks of exactly what you're talking about. This was somebody needing to be sold on all of this. Mm-hmm. The way that this has seemed to work in the last 10 to 15 years, it kind of feels like Stephen Jones generally has to tend to sell Jerry on something, especially if it's a milquetoast move. Jerry has to be sold on things that are milquetoast because he wants to make a splash. Stephen is more conservative. I don't know that that's what the conversation was, but this is certainly a conservative hire. This is certainly a milquetoast hire. I'm seeing reactions to the posts that we're putting up on social media right now, even one that I put up to the fact that we're doing this instant reaction right now. And the very first comment is, yawn. This is a milquetoast
That's not our fault.
move.
That's not our fault.
No, this is a milquetoast move that Jerry needed to be sold on. Again, we don't know that, but this definitely feels that way.
Well, I think the timing of all of it is paramount. I mean, you think about the fact that this went down to Mike McCarthy's last day under contract. I mean, a lot of us thought, they didn't have a plan once Mike McCarthy was out the door. They didn't know. And then you look at the people that they did hire. I think this all just goes to show that if they do have a plan, they have an interesting way of giving us faith that they have one. And if they don't, that seems to be more what's going on here, that they're just kind of reacting to a situation where things haven't gone the way that they wanted it to.
Just so you guys know, and I apologize, I had to put on my glasses here. I am getting texts from people inside the building as we speak right now. My question was, any reason why you did this so late in the day, right? And I put a smiley face, and it was, what I'm getting so far is, just when the deal got done, that's all. That sounds like a lot of spin going on. Listen, I'm not in the room. I'm not in the building. I'm just saying logically how these things work out. There's more writing coming. I'll update you guys when I get more on that. But Listen, I do think there will have to be some explanation by the Dallas Cowboys on this when we get to the press conference, which, by the way, is 11 a.m. on Monday morning. Now that we've covered some of the timing, you guys, I do think we need to talk about Brian Schottenheimer, who he is, what he represents in a football sense. And listen, the first thing, and this might not be the best thing. The first thing I think about when I hear the name Brian Schottenheimer is Marty Schottenheimer, his dad, who was an icon, right? And I think about Marty Ball. Marty Ball was tough. I love Marty Ball. It was tough. It was hard nosed. You run the ball. It was that old school. It wasn't the high flying AFC. It was that dirty, grungy, gritty AFC style ball where you had good defenses and you ran the ball and you had a fullback in your offense. And it is unlike a lot of what we see today. There's some throwbacks and they're working not half bad, but not, not unlike what we've seen. What do you guys think about when you hear the name Brian Schottenheimer, if anything?
Well, Joe, all the things that you just described are exactly what the Cowboys have been trying to recreate all these years. They want to go back to the Emmitt Smith days. They want to go back to a running back and a fullback in the backfield. That's what Stephen Jones wants. That's on some level what Jerry Jones wants. So it's really not all that surprising that this is the direction that they go, because there is at least some parallel between who at least Marty was as a head coach and who Brian may potentially be, given the fact that he is certainly his father's he's at the very least coming from his father's tree, as well as a number of other coaches. So it's really not that surprising that the Cowboys would go down this path, because that does jive with what Steven seems to want.
What do you think about Chris? I'm sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
No, go ahead, Chris.
I guess, guys, I'm just surprised with the quality of the coordinators that are still involved in games this weekend. It just, okay, I'm just going to throw out, okay, Cliff Kingsbury. He's been a head coach in the NFL. You can, dissect his resume there with Arizona, but I don't think anybody would say he was a complete failure as a head coach. He's completely rejuvenated Washington's offense. You think about hiring somebody like a Cliff Kingsbury, not only do you get some offensive innovation that maybe you haven't had in the building, but you also may simultaneously weaken one of your now main rivals, because now Jaden Daniels has to adjust to an entirely new coordinator. I look at that. I look at Kellen Moore. I guess I'm just wondering, I can't wait to hear what it was about Brian Schottenheimer that convinced them that he is better than all of the other available candidates that are still out there.
Go ahead, Michelle, and I'll answer that question, Chris, because I think I know their play, but go ahead, Michelle.
So when I hear the name Brian Schottenheimer, I think of a guy who no other NFL team interviewed in a coaching cycle where almost a quarter of the league had open head coaching vacancies. I mean, I know the Patriots wrapped up Mike Vrabel really early on, and then we had 6 that were really in the mix. But I mean, there were so many names getting tossed around out there. And the fact that the Cowboys interviewed 4 people, one of which was Leslie Frazier, who was also not interviewed by any other franchise, and another was who they ended up going with in Brian Schottenheimer, is just, I think that's the part that is so confusing to the Cowboys fan base, because, even if a Ben Johnson wouldn't work here or an Aaron Glenn wouldn't work here in Dallas, it's almost like, you got to show your fans that you're trying, even though Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley were unrealistic because of their price tag. You got to show that you're trying, that you're having the conversations, that you're at least considering something other than just what is, like Mike just said, a milk blanket, a milk dud, a milk
toast.
Milk toast.
Milk dud. I kind of like milk duds though.
Milk dud works.
No, we're not using that one.
But you look at his history. He's a 51-year-old who's been an assistant or a coordinator his entire career. He's never had head coaching experience, and you look at his track record in his 14 seasons as a coordinator, he's had 2 top 10 total offenses. He's had 5 top 10 scoring offenses, and that's over all of his years as a play caller. So I think that was your point, Chris, to understand from them the reasoning behind why they felt so confident in this hiring. It'll just be interesting to hear what they say, because it's anyone's guess on whether it's, authentic or not.
No, and I think you bring up a good point, Michelle, and that's, Chris wondering what they're going to say, and you the same thing, right? I have a sneaking suspicion that they'll hide behind the quarterback on this one. They've hidden behind the quarterback before in terms of, and listen, this is just how it comes off to me, blaming Dak Prescott for making all that money, and that's why they're not able to spend in free agency. They haven't come out and said that, but you don't have to read between the lines a lot to figure out that's what they mean when they say some of the things they do. And I suspect that they'll hide behind the quarterback with this one too, and they'll say that this move was about continuity. We're going to keep a lot of the same offense intact. An offense, by the way, that Dak Prescott thrived in a couple years ago. He was runner-up for MVP, right? 4,500 yards, 36 touchdowns. So I suspect they're going to hide behind the quarterback. But again, I'm not buying that. I have to be fully transparent. Dak's a veteran now. He's had multiple offensive coordinators. If they had to bring in another offensive coordinator, Dak would have adapted. He's a veteran. So I don't buy that. But I have a sneaking suspicion that's what you're going to hear. And here's the other point that I want to make right now before we go any further, because it's something that gnaws at me, and I think it has to be said and verbalized. The Cowboys are the most profitable sports franchise in the world, but they refuse to put a premium on spending on the head coach. Jerry Jones, in the famous split with Jimmy Johnson, made that comment about any of 500 head coaches could do this and be successful. I think he really believes that. And I think that is at the heart of why the Dallas Cowboys have been in the desert for the last 30 years. The organization has a philosophy where they don't spend on head coaches. Make no mistake, this Brian Schottenheimer hire will not cost them the going rate of what an NFL head coach will be. Bottom line, why would it? Jerry, if nothing else, is one of the best negotiators in sports. And if you don't have any head coaching experience, don't expect to get, or any leverage, don't expect to get big money. So I think the Cowboys fan base deserves better. They're the ones who have bought all the merchandise. They've watched all the games. They've allowed Jerry, who, listen, he knows how to handle TV contracts and contracts in general. He has catapulted that interest into being the most valuable sports franchise in the world. But without that fan base, it wouldn't happen. And I think at some point they need to be rewarded by spending a premium on the most important person in terms of caretaking the players, which is the biggest asset that the organization has in terms of football. So that's just the point I wanted to make. I had to get that off my chest, you guys, because as soon as I saw this name floated, that's the problem I have, and it's the problem that I'm going to continue to have. And I'll step back for a minute. I got another text coming in. I don't want to go off on too much of a rant than I already have. Y'all go ahead and take it. I don't want to get verklempt on air here.
Joe, to your point, though, and kind of piggybacking off of what Chris was saying earlier, referencing Cliff Kingsbury. He's already making head coach money to be the offensive coordinator of the Washington Commanders. So he was going to cost you some money. Ben Johnson was going to cost you a ton of money. Aaron Glenn, highly sought after, doing a fantastic job in Detroit for a team that went 15-2 this year. And oh, by the way, played for the Cowboys, at least for a moment when Bill Parcells was here. There was a connection there. They never bothered to pick up the phone because they don't want to spend money. And the other factor in all of this, and I heard this from people in Washington talking about Kingsbury, and the discourse was, why would he want to go there? This is not just about, do the Cowboys pick the best coach that's available to them? Are we sure these people were actually available to them? Do they have any interest in coming here and dealing with Jerry Jones and the circus?
I wonder what the back channel communication was, right? When the Cowboys reach out to the agent, does the agent say, hey, listen, you don't need to waste your time with Ben? Because here's the deal. If you're the Dallas Cowboys, you don't want to have Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn and Cliff Kingsbury as interview candidates unless they are real candidates. Because if you have them in for an interview and then they go somewhere else, then listen, it is public knowledge. You didn't win. And we all know that Jerry doesn't want to roll that way. So goodness gracious, I wish I could find out the back channel communication if there was anything even said like that. So the Cowboys said, you know what? We're not going to even ask for the interview. Regardless of how that plays out, it's a negative for the organization because I think Troy Aikman did a fantastic job of articulating how this isn't the coveted job that many might think it would be. And I think there were some problems with a lot of people in terms of understanding Troy's semantics because he was making the point of a person like a Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn, people who have choices. Obviously, this is in the larger scope a fantastic job. You're playing in the big room. It's one of only 32 jobs that exist like it. However, when you go inside of that and you have people who have more opportunities, would they rather go other places? And Mike, you made the point, and I think it's exactly right. They don't want to come and be involved in the circus. And believe you me, everyone in the NFL knows about the circus. We heard reporting on it. Schultz, the tight end with the Texans, talked about it this year. There were others who brought it up. But listen, it's common knowledge that this place does not work the way other places do.
There was an in-depth piece from Tyler Dunn this week talking about exactly this problem. And the term that he used to describe what's happening in Dallas was organizational rot.
Mm.
That's how the Dallas Cowboys are being described. And they had quotes from a former Cowboys executive. By the way, our Ed Werder just reporting right now, and just seeing the report come up on my screen that they're hiring Matt Eberflus as their defensive coordinator under Brian Schottenheimer. So a name familiar to Cowboys fans, former linebackers coach here.
I like that hire. I like that hire a lot.
Yeah.
Flus could coach. He did in terms of being a coordinator. I know there were faults, there were failings, timing issues, other issues. But
he was also trying to coach the Bears, to be fair. That's a tough spot to go.
Yeah,
good
no
luck,
doubt.
Ben Johnson.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wonder in terms of the timing, because I like Eberflus. I like that hire as well. I think maybe he wasn't quite as suited to be a head coach, but as a coordinator, I don't think anybody in the NFL would tell you that he doesn't do a bang-up job getting a defense ready to play. I know as a Lions fan, the Bears defense caused us a lot of problems over the years. So I don't think they had many issues in that regard. I just wonder, just to play devil's advocate, I'm not saying you bring in a parade of all these top hires when there's going to be intense competition for their services. But I wonder if you bring in somebody just for an interview with a very different offensive philosophy, do you get some insight maybe into your own search process? Does it bring to light certain qualities or certain things that you go back and you say, you know what, we hadn't thought about that, or we hadn't even considered some of those concepts, or certain ways you could structure an offense? I don't think there's anything wrong with being exposed to more information, especially if you have proof of concept that it's working in the NFL right now. And I just wonder, sort of by this slow-moving, lackluster search, that you didn't get exposed to maybe some of the really fresh ideas that maybe could help the team. And now you're really trying to play catch up in terms of filling out the staff as well.
Well, I totally agree with that part of it, Chris, because not only do you get exposed, let's say, and I don't know if Kellen Moore is going to end up being the head coach of the Saints, but if not, he might miss out on this cycle and have to go back. Then you get to pick his brain more on how he's evolved, and he's your competition. Same thing with Cliff Kingsbury. You get you get to hear from them about their evolution and the way that they look at things. And I think that is very valuable. But like I was saying before, and Chris and I have talked about this after shows when we talk about this, part of it is as an organization, the Cowboys have to kind of humble themselves to do things like that. And the brand doesn't work that way. And I think that's part of the problem, right? Uh, the brand is paramount. I know too many people who work in that building and who have worked in that building who tell me the same thing. Of course, they want to win, but they want to win on their terms, and that means the brand is important. But sometimes putting the brand first gets in the way of doing things that could help you out, and this is one of those instances, right? So what if you have these guys in for interviews, they end up, choosing other places? Who cares? I mean, you get the information you want. If they go elsewhere, they do. But again, I don't think that's how things work with the Dallas Cowboys, right? They want to identify a person, they want to bring them in, they want to get it done, and they don't want people to tell them no, right?
You know
And
what, Joe?
I just don't agree with it.
On the brand front, I just can't help but think, what are they doing to help their brand when the names of their last several head coaches include Brian Schottenheimer and Wade Phillips, and Jason Garrett was there for a decade, but still, I mean, if you think about, like, to me, this hire is the most, like, glaringly blatant statement about where this franchise is today versus where it was during its heyday, when the Dallas Cowboys head coaches were named Barry Switzer and Tom Landry and Jimmy Johnson, and they were winning Super Bowls and they were relevant because of what they were doing on the field. This is decades later. I was talking about it with Jonah earlier today. There is an entire generation of people who have grown up not knowing the Dallas Cowboys as a winning organization. And as much as they, I think, rely on what the brand has been for so long, that brand, can only withstand so much of this type of behavior. And I think when you have, a chance to make a big change. And I'm not saying that someone like a Deion Sanders was going to fix things, because I know we haven't even touched on that. That would have been great for headlines and off the field, entertainment. But,
Would have been fun for us.
Yeah, it would have been great for us.
But, Brian Schottenheimer, I just don't think moves the needle. And you talked about, how upset Jerry got with Troy's comments about this not being a highly coveted job. And then you give it to Brian Schottenheimer, and no disrespect to him or the gentleman that I named earlier in some of these guys who haven't been there for too long during their stints. But I just don't think that you can, that the names of the guys you've had in the last 20 years really stand up to the names you had when this was a franchise that dominated the NFL, because of not just the circus that surrounded the team, but also what the team was able to do on the field.
No doubt. A couple housekeeping things as we go on here. I did another text from inside the building. Apparently, Jerry and Schottenheimer didn't meet again until late today. There were some reports earlier that they had met actually earlier in the day. Those reports were false. Again, reasons for the late timing of the deal getting done. A couple of other things. We've got a poll, our YouTube poll that's going on, and this is not surprising at all, you guys. 87% hate it, 13% love it. Wow, getting the love. That's very interesting.
Love.
Wow.
But that must have been love it or hate it. Those had to be the only two options. Had to be.
There's some real Chan Gailey energy to all of this.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna have to take a break here in a couple of minutes. But before we do, we're gonna throw it to our Locked On crew. But before we go, I'm curious about when you guys, and we'll go around the horn on this one. When you guys heard, what was your the first thing that you said, did, or came to mind?
He really did it. And I don't know if that was with a question mark or an exclamation point at the end, but I said, they really did that. Wow. That was
Mike?
mine.
what I keep coming back to in my head, the discussion we were having before about the brand, about what this organization has stood for so long. Would it not help to win a Super Bowl? Would that not help them sell jerseys and sell season tickets and sell all their merchandise? Wouldn't that help? Shouldn't that alone make winning the first priority? Shouldn't that alone make spending money on your head coach and on your coaching staff the one area of real talent around your football program that isn't bound by a salary cap, where you can actually splash money around and bring in the best and brightest from across the league? Wouldn't that help your bottom line of trying to sell tickets and make money? So why Brian Schottenheimer?
Chris?
Yeah, well, first of all, Joe, Around the Horn is a copyrighted concept by ESPN, so we can't go there. But
That was lowercase h.
Yeah.
On horn.
Okay, gotcha. The first thing I thought was, I can't wait to hear Michael Irvin's reaction. He's been so outspoken on this.
Yes.
I really can't wait to hear from Michael Irvin.
No doubt. His comment the other night was just like, no. And I mean, in that resolute way that only Michael can say it.
Yeah.
For me, you guys, I'd been on X all day just waiting, and I had finally kind of, all right, great, I'm gonna grab a book, and that's when it happened. And not for that reason, but because of the choice they ultimately came up with, the only thing I could think was, come on, man. Come on. Is this really where we are? Is this where we are as an organization? And the other thing is,
yes,
you brought it up, Michelle, when you mentioned the fact that no one else even asked to speak to Brian Schottenheimer. No one else has asked to speak to Brian Schottenheimer about being a head coach for 15 years. 15 years. So the Cowboys are trying to sell us on the fact that they're the smartest people in the room because they're going where nobody else did. They're trying to sell us on the fact that they know something that no one else knew. And unfortunately, the last 30 years of their track record screams that could not be the case.
Watch this now be the one that works. Just
well, I was going to say, I don't know if Brian Schottenheimer is going to win or not, but man, if he does, it'll be the story of all stories. It would be. All right, listen, thanks you guys. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll re-rack, figure out what we're going to do after that. But right now, we do want to throw it to our Locked On Cowboys crew. Landon McCool, he's got some instant reaction, and he's also going to get more into the background of who Brian Schottenheimer is. Brian Schottenheimer, the 10th head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. It is official. Now let's throw it to Locked On Cowboys.
It's the shot heard round the world as the Dallas Cowboys hire Brian Schottenheimer as their new head coach. Let's break it all down. Hi, I'm Landon McCool with the Locked On Cowboys podcast, and let's discuss some of the pros, some of the cons with Brian Schottenheimer, the new head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Let's start with the cons because I think that's the reason that most people are watching this video. There is clearly some issues with this hiring, and let's start with the process. It was a terrible process from beginning to end. It just feels like the Cowboys got rejected by Mike McCarthy early on in this process, and then were basically chasing their tail. They interviewed 4 candidates, 2 of which really do feel like Rooney Rule checkoffs in Leslie Frazier, who has been a defensive assistant but isn't even a defensive coordinator at a couple of different spots. And then Robert Saleh, who I do think is a legitimate candidate, but mostly as a defensive coordinator for one of these offensive coordinator head coaches that they were interviewing. And that's all they interviewed outside of that. In fact, frankly, they interviewed the last 3 play callers for the Dallas Cowboys. And when you include Mike McCarthy, before him was Kellen Moore, and then obviously Brian Schottenheimer himself, who is, I guess, not the play caller, but the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. And that leads me to my other issue with this situation in general is that Schottenheimer's made it very clear that wherever he's going next, he wants to call plays. And so if he's the play caller as well as the head coach, that's an enormous step to take for a guy that wasn't even the play caller last year, to go from an organizing principle for the offense as a guy that's just basically running practice and helping organize things to a guy that's calling the plays and organizing the entire team. That's a huge step up in job description for a guy that has never been a head coach before and hasn't been a play caller in several years. I think there are some positive aspects to that. We should discuss that. I do think that Schottenheimer has a lot of the kind of temperament, the personality, the intelligence, the experience to be a good head coach. I think, as far as candidates for head coach, he makes a lot of sense in his experience, in who he is. Obviously, sitting at the foot of his dad, Marty Schottenheimer, who was obviously a very famous head coach as well, who also had his own problems breaking through when it came to the playoffs. I think that's all good experience for Schottenheimer that he's going to bring to the table and it's going to be helpful. But again, if he's the play caller, that's going to be problematic. It's going to distract him. And I worry about Schottenheimer as a play caller when he isn't having to be the head coach. I certainly worry about him when he is the head coach and having to call plays.
Brian Schottenheimer has never been an NFL head coach, but has his time come? Hi, I'm Marcus Mosher, and he is Landon McCool, and we are the hosts of the Locked On Cowboys podcast. And we're discussing Brian Schottenheimer as the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Landon, talk to us about some potential positives and negatives about Brian Schottenheimer potentially being this next coach.
Well, the positives are going to sound familiar, right? And speaking of familiar, it's about familiarity with the Joneses, familiarity with the Cowboys, familiarity with Dak. Obviously, another guy that is someone who is directly off of the coaching scrap heap from coaching the Cowboys last season. The funny thing that's interesting here is that Schottenheimer wasn't the play caller for the Cowboys while he was here as the offensive coordinator. That was Mike McCarthy's job, and really his job while he was here was to be kind of an organizing principal. And I think that that has kind of given him a lot of very positive experiences. He's worked under two Super Bowl winning coaches, Mike McCarthy and Pete Carroll. He's definitely gotten some experience. His father is obviously a very, very famous head coach for many, many years in the league. So I do think that as far as qualified to be a head coach, or the temperament to be the head coach, or to have the kind of qualities that you're looking for in a head coach, I think Brian Schottenheimer actually has a lot of those. And if you listen to him, he's very personal. I think he's going to have no problem if he got the job being the face of the franchise. The question now becomes, he didn't call plays last time. And when he was with Seattle, he wasn't particularly great at calling plays. I mean, I think Russell Wilson can kind of, make you call plays a very specific, particular way. Maybe that was not the way Schottenheimer wanted to call plays. I don't know. But I do think that, as far as the success at the offensive coordinator part of this, and who's calling plays and what his coordinators look like, those are all huge unknowns. And again, even though Schottenheimer may be kind of temperamental for this kind of situation, he still has never been a head coach before.
We've seen worse candidates with a lot worse qualifications get head coaching jobs before. So in that sense, I think Brian Schottenheimer is qualified for the job. And I think he would do a really good job with Dak Prescott because they're just very familiar with each other. But is he the right coach for this Cowboy team that desperately needs to get over the hump? I'm not sure.
Welcome back, everyone, to WFAA Plus. Joe Trahan. I got the sports team here with me. Mike Leslie, Michelle Montaigne. We're talking about the Cowboys. Breaking news on this night, hiring Brian Schottenheimer as the 10th head coach in Dallas Cowboys history. Wow, doesn't that just have a ring to it, you guys? Brian Schottenheimer. No, I'm not going to go there. Listen, we've talked a little bit about it. We'd like to welcome you back in. Hopefully you're joining us on WFAA Plus. We just want to give you a sense and a feel for what has happened over the last few days, how the Cowboys have gone about hiring Brian Schottenheimer to take over this organization and to take over this team. And listen, there will be reaction from far and wide, absolutely panning this move. And for me, it's about part of it is about the process by which they came to Brian Schottenheimer. But I will say this, and we kind of started on this thread as we said goodbye a few minutes ago. Nobody knows how Brian Schottenheimer is going to do. We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. But when you try and hire a new head coach, I would think if I were the owner of a team, I want to try and create the best set of odds that I can to have success for my team. And I don't know if the Cowboys have the best odds right now with a guy like Brian Schottenheimer. I just don't. What do you guys think, Michelle?
Oh, okay. All right.
If I think that, can you repeat that 1 second? There was conversations going on right
No,
Brian.
no,
What
no.
were you
I was
saying?
just saying, I don't know if the odds are great that there's going to be success here, right? If I'm the owner, right, I'm
Yes.
trying to put together the best odds, the best circumstances for success for my team, and I just don't know. And that's not to say that Brian Schottenheimer can't win. I'm just saying I don't know if that's the best odds that could exist. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think some of the conversation around, if you think about the Kellen Moore versus Brian Schottenheimer conversations that took place across really the national media over the last couple of weeks since McCarthy walked, um, you know, the comparison between the two was, at least with Brian Schottenheimer, you have that like coach in him. He can stand in front of a room and command it. He has that ability to fire players up and, relate to them at different touch points. Whereas a lot of the talk about Kellen was that he just didn't have that same leadership on display that I think Brian Schottenheimer does have. And I mean, honestly, I think a lot of the guys really liked him, especially, when he came in and played the role that he did. He steps into this offensive coordinator role when Kellen leaves. And even though he wasn't calling the plays, I think he was really well liked. And so
Yes.
from that perspective, I think the guys are probably happy to have someone that they know they like. That's when you're dealing with professional athletes. I think that probably goes further than maybe people give credit to. But I also think about like the year before he came to Dallas, even though his first season was like the consultant role or whatever, he was working closely with Dan Quinn. The year before that, he was in charge of he was a passing game coordinator in Jacksonville under Urban Meyer when he had Trevor Lawrence, a generational talent, as many people would describe him. And they had the worst passing game in the NFL, like by a long shot. I think they were averaging less than 15 points per game. And he was the driving force behind that. And I think if you just look at the statistics overall, like of the 14 years, oh
There
God,
he is.
do we want
The-
Pete Dalkas's
The leering
opinion?
weather guy.
Hey, did you hear
Look
that
at the
Brian
leering
Schottenheimer is going to be
weather
the new
dude.
head coach?
I just talked to Jerry. That's the joke. It's not Schottenheimer. Belichick is coming here. They're bringing Belichick from North Carolina to here.
Listening to Pete talk about sports is as dangerous as listening to me talk about the weather.
Well, at least I didn't say Joe Torre's the new head coach, Joe. I didn't say that now, did I?
No,
Do you believe
did
this
not
on a Friday night at 9:00 they make the announcement? Isn't this the time of week and the time of night that you bury something? Just saying.
It's the news dump, right?
Just saying.
It's where you dump the
See
news.
ya.
Have a good
That's
show.
precisely how we started this show about an hour ago. Yeah, that was what Joe led with. He
Oh.
said, "This is what we're trying to hide."
Yeah, I know.
Pete
Nothing
Dallas
like
has
it.
about as much credence as the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys as Brian Schottenheimer.
Precisely.
Yeah, right? Right?
Precisely.
I
Mhm.
mean,
That
you
would be
know,
fun.
I mean,
Let's make Delkus head coach. Give him a headset.
oh my God.
At this rate.
Yeah. Cue the revolt. And no, kidding. Mike, what's your take in terms of the odds of success for this move?
Dude, anybody's guess. What does anybody actually know about this guy? Cowboys fans in particular must be looking at this move going, who is this person?
Yeah, that's part of it. That's part of it. And
He was part of the Let Russ Cook movement in Seattle.
right.
It
And
was
listen,
kind of the reason for the Let Russ Cook.
Well, it was interesting, right? Because that ended up being a double-edged sword. That year, Russ, 40 touchdown passes, 40, right? Huge year for Russ, but there became this. The offense did great at the beginning of that year, but it tapered off so badly at the end of the year. Russ also seemingly was okay with Schottenheimer leaving. So, I mean, think about that. I mean, the quarterback goes for a huge season. He's still okay with it. I mean, that one was hard to understand. But
Well, because I
listen,
think part of the problem was the let Russ cook thing was kind of everybody talking to Schottenheimer, like, dude, let Russ cook.
Right, yeah, yeah. No,
Stop
that's
calling
part of
dog
it.
plays, call these ones and let him cook.
That's part of it. I mean, I do think that familiarity with Dak will be the thing that they sell us, as I was saying before, in terms of making this move. But when you think about who Brian Schottenheimer is, listen, he has been in and around this league for 25 years. I mean, 4 different stops as an offensive coordinator, including the one that Michelle was talking about in Jacksonville. And yes, that was failed. But I will say, Urban Meyer deserves a ton of credit for the absolute dysfunction that season was. I can't pin all that on Shotty. But again, he didn't do much to help because it turned out to be awful. But listen,
Urban spent more time in a bar stool than he did in the film room.
Yep, that was not good film on Urban. So when you think about Brian Schottenheimer, though, he's got a ton of experience. Just none of it has been head coaching experience, and there hasn't been really a move afoot for him to even have the opportunity to be a coach, to be a head coach. You know, during his Jets days, when those Jets teams with Mark Sanchez, they made it to back-to-back AFC championship games when he was the offensive coordinator. There was interest in him being a head coach then, right? But outside of that, that's been it. He obviously didn't land one of those opportunities. So we're talking about a guy who's going to have to start over. Cowboys fans have to hope that his NFL DNA kicks in, because we can't go through what we have seen so many of these Cowboys coaches go through, struggling with end of game timing, struggling with how to call your timeouts, struggling with when to call challenges. This fan base has been through that enough, and you just have to hope that it's not on the job training for those things when it comes to Brian Schottenheimer. And those are some of the things that, are fearful right out of the gate for me. Can
Maybe.
he?
Sorry,
No, go ahead.
I was maybe, and this is really trying to look at this through positive glasses, but maybe, because how many times have we seen not just the Cowboys organization, but teams across the league swing at the hotshot coordinator that does a great job of scheming up plays, but can't do squat as the CEO of a football team that you need the head coach to be?
Josh McDaniels swung and missed twice, right?
Yes.
Twice.
So we've seen this many, many times over with coordinators all across the league. We mentioned Matt Eberflus earlier. Great defensive mind, really good coach, not built to be a head coach. It was on some level the criticism that was laid at the feet of Dan Quinn a couple of years ago, even though he did have a decent bit of success and was this close to winning a Super Bowl with Atlanta. We've heard that criticism laid at the feet of a lot of guys that were really good coordinators in this league. Maybe, if nothing else, Brian Schottenheimer, as the son of a bona fide successful head coach in the NFL. Again, didn't win a Super Bowl, but Marty Schottenheimer had a really good run with multiple franchises, Chargers, Chiefs. He won a lot of football games in this league and knew how to run a team, knew how to do the things that you're talking about in terms of understanding how the clock operates and how to use your timeouts effectively. Maybe he picked up all of that stuff as a kid watching his dad coach, and that's just baked into who Brian Schottenheimer is. And maybe he'll be great at all of those things.
Team osmosis.
Yes, maybe he got it all by osmosis. Yes, because there isn't a whole lot over here to say, hey, look what a great coordinator he was. There are moments, as you mentioned, Jets, whatever. There are moments. There's not a ton of examples over here that had everybody chomping at the bit to hire Brian Schottenheimer. But maybe you do at least have one thing over here that, hey, he's Marty's son, and maybe he just knows how to be a head coach. Maybe.
And maybe, just maybe, he was okay with the thought of one Jason Witten joining the staff. And I know that's been something that's been talked about at length.
Good point.
I'd be interested
maybe
to
he's
know
okay
what
with somebody calling down from the owner's booth with an idea or two.
Maybe he's okay with Jerry Jones calling the plays. No, I'm kidding. But no, I mean, I wonder if, there was reports that was one of the sticking points with McCarthy was, the thought of having Jason Witten inside the building. And I just wonder if that is something that we will see transpire over the course of Schottenheimer's time as the head coach.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's obviously amongst the top questions that'll be asked on Monday at 11 o'clock when they have the press conference to introduce Brian Schottenheimer as the 10th head coach of the Cowboys. I certainly want to know if this is the time Jason Witten's going to get involved. Now, I think if I'm not mistaken, and Mike being the high school football expert probably knows this off the top of his head, Witten's youngest son, Mike, still has 2 years left.
Hoover
Right?
still has 2 years left.
He still has 2 years left. I'm curious. I'm just curious about, when Witten's going to make the jump. I'm curious what Jason Witten's wife would have to say about, hey, don't you want to finish out, his couple of years in high school as well? I don't know. I'm curious. But yeah, you're right, Michelle. Was that one of the sticking points? It made sense if he was open to that would be another positive for Brian Schottenheimer. But
because if you're Mike McCarthy and you want to continue being the head
yeah.
coach of the Dallas Cowboys for a long time, and Jerry says to you, hey, let's bring Witten in.
Yeah.
There's a reason, and you know exactly what it is. If you're Brian Schottenheimer, and with all due respect to Brian Schottenheimer, and I know we've said a lot of things that have not been particularly kind to Brian Schottenheimer over the course of the last hour, but with all due respect to Brian Schottenheimer, he's going to be more inclined to be chomping at the bit for the opportunity, period, to be a head coach in the NFL and to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And hey, you want to bring Jason Witten in as the heir apparent? Fine. Let's go. I'm going to show you that you don't need an heir apparent and try and prove that you didn't need that in the first place. But if you're an established coach, if you're Ben Johnson, if you're Aaron Glenn, if you're Cliff Kingsbury, and from conversations like you talked about earlier, Joe, with the back channel conversations with these agents, and it's in the water supply that, hey, come to Dallas, be our head coach, but you need to hire Jason Witten as your passing game coordinator or your tight ends coach or whatever, because we need to get him on an NFL staff because at some point he's going to be our head coach. And even though that may not be the spoken part of the deal, it's the obvious implication. A lot of guys are not going to be okay with that because then what the heck are you hiring me for?
No, you're right. And, here's the issue that I have with it. And I do want to see Jason Witten get involved in coaching in the NFL because I think he would do a great job of it. I mean, in terms of the guys that I've had the pleasure to cover with the Cowboys, I mean, he's near or if not at the top, right? In terms of people who I think could be, a leader of a team, a CEO of an organization, and kind of carry that weight. He's been there. He's done that. He understands the language of football. His grandfather, who kind of took him in and directed him, was a football coach. So he's been around coaching his entire life. He gets it and he understands it. And I hope eventually Jason gets his chance. But you guys think about what happens if that is the case, if he is on the staff. I think it will eventually, at some point, create more dysfunction. Because think about these Cowboy players. They pay attention to all the media as well. They know that Schottenheimer didn't have any other opportunities. So let's think about when it comes time to really be a great coach. It's when things are tough. It's when things are not going well. And listen, he's got to try and keep that locker room from splintering away. And, when he has to get in somebody's face and say something that's not appealing to them, you best believe that player's not going to forget, hey, man, let's not forget, nobody wants you to be a head coach beside the Cowboys anyway. So how much are you going to come at me? Okay. I mean, there's room for dysfunction there. And if Jason Witten's on the staff as the heir apparent, how much more dysfunction would that create? So as much as I want Witten to get involved, I think it could be problematic. And I'm trying to look down the line. I'm trying to forecast. And I'm not saying that that's going to necessarily happen, but I know it could.
Well, because who are you going to try and impress? If you're a player on the team and they've hired Schottenheimer as the head coach and they hire Jason Witten as fill in the blank,
tight ends coach, assistant head coach. I don't think he can be assistant head coach, but yeah.
Yeah. What you're not going to have him come in and be your offensive coordinator right out.
No,
At least I would
no.
hope that you wouldn't, because that would be a step way too soon. But you want him to be on the staff. You want him to be a part of the organization. You want him to start to get coaching experience in the NFL. All of those things are valid to want, by the way, for Jason Witten, but it does create, because they're already Jerry Jones has already fielded questions on the idea of Jason Witten being the head coach of his franchise. This has already happened. He's already put it in the ether that, oh yeah, I think he'd do a great job, just like that other tight end we used to have here in
That's
Dallas,
right.
referencing Dan Campbell. So this is already part of the discourse. This is already part of what these players understand. So if you've got both of these guys on the staff, who are you going to try and impress? Who are you going to be who's going to be the coach that you're going to try and cozy up to? Who's going to be the coach that you're going to try and develop a relationship with, so that you are still a part of the fold 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, whenever the time comes that Jason Witten is the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys? It creates immediately a split, or at the very least, confusion.
Especially because Schottenheimer doesn't have like a proven track record to fall back on or to really stand tall on. He doesn't have, I mean, even in his days as coordinator, he obviously doesn't have any days as a head coach prior to this. And I just feel like, think about like the Micah Parsons in the room, right? Think about some of these guys who mean so much and who have these big personalities and who can be hard to kind of rein in sometimes.
Yeah.
And you're up there trying to be the leader of these guys, win or not. I mean, even if it's, just this year and say Jason does spend the next 2 years finishing out his son's time in high school. If it is just Brian Schottenheimer without Witten even in the building, like it's going to be hard for him to, I mean, it's going to be hard to kind of demand or command the respect that, a Mike McCarthy has walking in the door, because he's won a Super Bowl and because he's been in the league for as long as he has in a head coaching position, and he's had success at that position. I feel like Brian Schottenheimer's already up against it because he doesn't have that to his name or to his resume. The things he does have to his resume, as we just pointed out, aren't necessarily the strongest bullet points. And so I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic, Witten or no Witten, for him. I know obviously he has some of the offensive guys that like him, but you need more than just guys to like you in order to lead a team, especially a team that operates in the dysfunction as the Dallas Cowboys do.
Oh, ain't that the truth? Yes.
But
it's true.
I really, I guess you think about the guys who were left that they had the opportunity to interview. And I feel like, if it wasn't going to be Kellen, I don't feel like Robert Saleh was ever going to be a fit. Leslie Frazier really just felt like a out of left field interview. And so if these were the 4 guys they were going to interview, I thought that, when McCarthy interviewed, he was one of just 2 candidates that they spoke to formally. You would think that this was going to be a longer, more in-depth interview cycle, but with the way that they operate and what they ultimately landed on, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the players react to having this guy as the one in command.
No, I think you make a great point, Michelle. I mean, listen, and it's one thing between what they'll say publicly, and how they will act and what they will do. Bill Parcells talked about it all the time. There's no substitute for demonstrated ability. Mike McCarthy came in. He had demonstrated ability. I can win a Super Bowl. I did it. So there was, he had that skin on the wall. Unfortunately, Shotty doesn't have that. He just doesn't. So listen, none of those hot coordinators have it either. So he's got to go get it, just like they got to go get it. And again, he's got more of a foundation you can look at than some of those other guys as well. He's been in the league longer. He's also been in the league longer and demonstrated that he couldn't get his offense consistently to being the best in the league. He's demonstrated that too. Excuse me. So it cuts both ways. Sorry about
you
that.
Guys,
got me all choked up here.
You guys know better than most. The head coach of the Dallas Cowboys can only operate within the parameters in which he is given. And so you talk about the players that Schottenheimer is going to have to work with on the field. You talk about the things that he'll have to deal with. I mean, he's getting a quite the spoonful when it comes to his first taste of head coaching in the NFL, because he's doing it with an organization that's going to be unlike any other head coaching experience he would have if given the chance.
One bit of house cleaning, so to speak. We spoke earlier about Ed Werder reporting that the Cowboys have hired Matt Eberflus as their defensive coordinator. He had to correct it. Eberflus has emerged as a candidate to be the next defensive coordinator and discuss the position, but the team will first conduct interviews as required by the league rules before a final decision, per a source.
Sure.
Sounds like the most Cowboy thing ever. Hey, we're gonna hire Matt Eberflus. Oh, that's right. We gotta talk to other
right.
people
We gotta,
first.
wait, rules? Dude, rule?
Reply here.
Okay, hang on.
I suspect that Matt Eberflus will absolutely be the defensive coordinator of your Dallas Cowboys. And
Rappaport just posted it's a 4-year deal, which is pretty boilerplate and standard, but that just came
4
down.
year, 400,000. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. That was a joke.
I do want to know the number.
Who's making more, Brian Schottenheimer or Joe Trahan?
Well, that's easy, but I do want to know the number. I do want to know the number. That's for sure, because that will only drive home my rant that I gave you guys in the last hour about the fact that Cowboys don't pay a premium for head coaches, and it might be the reason why their fans are stuck out in the desert for the last 3 decades. Let's talk about another reason, though, and you hinted at this, Michelle, so thanks. Another reason why Cowboy fans, I don't know if you have a whole lot to hang on to. I understand the apathy right now. This franchise has already come out and said that they don't have a lot of money to spend in free agency. So with that being the case, I want to kind of, amongst us, talk about what you guys think are some of the most pressing needs when you think about free agency, what the Cowboys could do, and what the Cowboys should do. Now, listen, what they can do, they're crying broke already, which they certainly did last year. I saw one report last year they spent the least of any team in the NFL in terms of free agency. We know that because Eric Kendricks, the linebacker, was really the only thing they got out of that haul. If they do something similar, I think Cowboys fans, you can prepare yourself for another around 500, if not sub 500 season. But I'll go first and give you guys a chance to think about it. When I think about the biggest, the most pressing needs, I think it's got to start up front on the offensive and defensive lines. If they could find a veteran who could be, let's talk offensive line first. If they could find a veteran who could play either guard spot to, obviously, Tyler Smith has left guard just on lock because he's one of the best in the NFL. But you would have a break in case of emergency situation if he has to go out to left tackle, if you could find a veteran who could play both guards, right? I don't know, I fear that Zach Martin may not be here next year. It is a fear. That is speculation. I don't know. But if that's the case, I think that becomes one of the most pressing needs. We know how much trouble they have had trying to stop the run. So obviously trying to find, and I know they don't grow on trees, but they've got to find more than what Mozzie Smith has been able to do in terms of being a run stuffer and run plugger in the middle. Now, of course, this is all predicated on what Eberflus, if he does indeed end up being the defensive coordinator, how he wants to create this defense. In terms of him being here before, I feel like he may have wanted more faster. What's up, Jonah?
Hey, there he is.
There he is. I think he may have been
just
looking
in my
at
ears. Hey, they said, "What's up, Jonah?"
What?
He said, "What up?"
Sorry.
Well, of course.
Darn headphones.
Yes. We'll see
He
what he
didn't
wants
just
to do.
ignore you, is what I was making sure you do.
Thank you. Anyway, I think offensive and defensive line is where they need to start.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
I don't think there's any question, and I think that your thought about Zach Martin, that is well-founded speculation. That is speculation that's been articulated by basically the entirety of the DFW sports media. I think everybody's kind of assuming anyway that it's going that direction. It is, to your point, not official. He hasn't addressed it since he addressed it before the season. But when he addressed it before the season and said it was a thought that he had crossed his mind to bring Bill Parcells up again, if you thought about it, you've basically already retired. And then he had the season that he had from an injury perspective, from an overall perspective. He was very clearly, probably because of the injuries, but he was very clearly not Zach Martin anymore. And I don't know, maybe that sticks in his craw and he says, forget that. I'm going to get healthy and show you guys one more year who I am. But yeah, I think it's pretty well-founded speculation that he's probably anyway riding off into the sunset, and that's going to create even more profound need for them on an offensive line that wasn't all that great last year. It was frankly better after he left because they could find some continuity and some health with a number of guys, filling his role. Brock Hoffman in particular. But they've got to get better there. They've got to. That's where they were. That's what made them the Cowboys for such a long period of time. Basically, going back to that 14 through 22, for all intents and purposes. That stretch of legitimate success, 23 really, because you do have to carry it through last year.
Yeah.
That stretch of success was largely predicated on a really good offensive line.
And they built it through the draft.
That anymore.
No, they built it through the draft.
All of it
did.
built through the draft, yes.
Right? And it was Zeke Elliott, and it was play action, and it's why Dak looks so good. I mean, I just think about so many times there's the play action fake to the running back, and he hits the over route for a 25-yard gain. I mean, that was the driving force in their offense, and you're right. I think that's what they need to get back to. What about you, Michelle?
Well, I know you said they built it through the draft, but I thought what was the most important detail that you said at the beginning, Joe, was a veteran offensive lineman, because you had, Cooper Beebe and Tyler Guyton starting however many games last year, especially when Guyton wasn't injured. And Jerry said as much, maybe they expected a little too much out of their rookies on the offensive line. So I do think, just to echo what you guys have said, obviously they need help up front, and getting a veteran presence in there, I think would do wonders, especially if Zach Martin isn't back. I feel like saying running back is kind of a cop-out at this point.
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it's a cop-out. I do not think it's a cop-out.
Yeah, I was really happy to see Rico Dowdle have, the last couple months that he did, or at least that stretch there where he was the number one back and he was running like it. But I think really, if you look at the guys outside, bringing in Brandon Cooks when they did, he was good that first year. Obviously, he kind of struggled to be anything consistent this season. And then really outside of CD, you don't have anybody else. And if you're going to have a quarterback who can't run or isn't going to be mobile, especially with where Dak is at in his career, then you've got to have weapons on the outside to get the ball to, especially if you're only going to have like a Rico Dowdle in the backfield. So that to me, outside of, if I'm going to expand beyond what you guys have already said, which I agree are the priorities, number one and number two, I would say probably the guys on the outside, getting someone in there who's more reliable than a Jalen Tolbert or a Jalen, Cropper or Jalen Brooks. Any of those guys, someone outside of CD. Yeah. I was like, well, I've got to be right if I just keep going with Jalen.
I think you nailed that one, because that's the other thing I was going to bring up, because we're going to have a new era for Dak, right? If you want to talk about the Eras tour, if I want to be relevant with what my daughters tell me to keep up with Taylor Swift.
Keep it going, Joe. Yeah.
I think Dak is going to go into his mostly pocket era, right? Because we know what happens when he tries to be mobile. It just doesn't work anymore, right? So as he does, I think one of the under the radar key acquisitions they need to make in free agency is a veteran with superb hands, does not have to have speed, but is a chain mover. That will be so vital to Dak right now. I think about a guy like Cedric Wilson. Noah Brown was kind of rounding into that, but then he left and made more money. No problem with that. Dalton Schultz was a chain mover for Dak, more so than any of these young tight ends have been. So whether it's a veteran tight end with some tread still left on the tire, or if it's a slot guy, if it's an outside guy who's a little bit bigger, and I know they brought in the Mingo kid thinking along those lines. I didn't see anything from him that I necessarily liked, but it's got to be a veteran who can get it for you in those clutch and crunch situations on third down. Because the way that defenses are going to try and attack the Cowboys, I think it is going to continue to be difficult for them to try and get chunk plays the way we used to see it, right? It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Michelle brought up Brandon Cooks earlier, and listen, he had moments here. There were stretches where he played pretty well. I think there was a lot of excitement when they signed him. I think that offseason where they went and got Cooks and Stephon Gilmore in a couple-day span was the most active we have seen them in an offseason from a free agency perspective in a while. And
you
even
have to go back to
that
Brandon
wasn't
Carr.
Yeah, you basically got to go back to Brandon Carr, which is before I got to Dallas. It's been a while. They finally went out and spent, and neither of those were like, oh my gosh, splashy moves, especially not from a financial perspective, but they were good, I would say shrewd moves, and Gilmore worked out brilliantly, if for just the 1 year. And Cooks worked out okay this year, not as well, and injuries had a lot to do with that. I am a little bit, in looking back at it now, and we're probably in the post Brandon Cooks world, I imagine at this point, that's probably going to be one of the casualties of this offseason. I am a little bit disappointed in the way that the Brandon Cooks experiment went. There were moments, there were flashes, but Joe, I know you remember this well, and this goes for both of his training camps, but certainly his first one. I think we all went, oh my gosh, wait until you guys see Brandon Cooks on the field for the Cowboys. He's going to be, because he was terrific in camp. He was terrific in camp. And it just never, again, there were moments where he made some plays, don't get me wrong, but it never got to the level that we all thought it was going to.
Well, first of all, he's a fantastic human being.
Yes.
Right? And I would say the two guys I just rooted for the most in terms of wanting them to have that breakout and be impactful were Cooks and Jalen Tolbert. Both of them just exceptional human beings, really good dudes, right? And Cooks is a smart guy. He's a pilot. I mean, great conversationalist. And you just wanted it to happen. But the truth is it never did. And that's football. You know, it's not always going to work that way. And it was, man, but I wanted it to, and it didn't. And it hurt the Cowboys because they needed those chunk plays, and he couldn't continue to provide them. That's why I don't think he'll be on the roster next year. I don't think Jalen Tolbert will be either. But we'll see. We'll see. Change is coming, and it is going to be a lot of it. Brian Schottenheimer now is going about the business of trying to fill out his coaching staff. That's the one plus to getting that done now. Don't wait another weekend until after these conference championship games are over, and there might be more people, other coaches looking for jobs. Go now, try and put your staff together and move along. All right, we're going to take a quick break here and plan out our next strategy. But before I go, we got to thank Chris Lawrence for doing a great job before he had to go and do the 10 o'clock show, which is going on right now. But we've got the history of Cowboys coaches that we want to share with you here on WFAA Plus, and then we will plot our next move. We may or may not see you on the other side of this, but thanks so much for joining us. Brian Schottenheimer, the 10th. I can't even say it because I don't believe it. I don't want to believe it. Brian Schottenheimer.
Is this really the world we're living in?
It is. Can we believe it? It is. Brian Schottenheimer, the 10th head coach of your Dallas Cowboys. Now let's take a look at that history of Cowboys coaches. And we are back. We're glad you're joining us here on WFAA. Plus, we're talking about the Cowboys hiring of Brian Schottenheimer, the 10th head coach in Cowboys history. We
Wait, not
appreciate
Deion?
you joining us here on WFAA. Plus, what was that, Mike?
Not Dion?
It is not Deion Sanders. No, it's not Pete Carroll.
Darn.
It is Brian Schottenheimer, son of Marty. If we had a Marty Ball revival, I wouldn't hate it. It wouldn't be the worst thing. Great defense, great run game, and have Dak make some clutch plays because he could. I wouldn't mind it at all. Before we let you go, we do want to give our final thoughts about what this day means, what this hiring means for the Cowboys, and how we look forward. So, Mike, I'll let you lead us off, just trying to encapsulate your thoughts on this. Listen, it's a history-making night, not exactly the history we thought it would be or when we thought
Yeah.
it would be, but it's a history-making night for the Dallas Cowboys.
It is. It is. Hanson was just texting me a couple minutes ago. He said this is what I expected a month ago. A half-assed coach that nobody else around the league wants. It's unfortunately true. It is.
Right.
It's
Right.
that is the world that the Cowboys are living in now. And it brings us back to something we discussed earlier. It's because they don't want to pay anybody. They don't want to pay top dollar for coaches, even though they print money at the Dallas Cowboys. They are the most valuable franchise in all of sports. Jerry Jones won't let you forget about it. And yet they don't want to use some of that money to make their franchise better, to make their team better. There's a lot of things that the Dallas Cowboys do. There's a lot of great things the Dallas Cowboys do. Off the field stuff I'm talking about, just things that they do in the community. There's a lot of great things that this franchise does. But the front porch of the Dallas Cowboys is the football team. And for some reason, they don't invest in the football team. They don't invest in the football team on the field with the players. You look at the actual cash spend for this franchise, it's near the bottom of the league. Despite all the big money contracts for Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and on and on and on, you look at the actual money spent by this franchise on their roster, they are routinely over the last several years near or at the bottom of the league. They don't spend money on their players. They don't spend money on their coaches. Why? And until they answer that question, until they change that philosophy, they're going to continue to have the results that they have had. This is an area where they could spend a ton of money and nobody could cap it. Nobody could say boo. Jerry could throw $30 million a year at whatever coach he wants. Why not? Doesn't have to be 30. Make it reasonable. Make it competitive. Make it the top of the market, but by $15, whatever. But be the top of the market. You have all the money in the world. You are the guy in the NFL that has all the money. Go spend some of it on your head coach. Go spend some of it on your coordinators. Why on earth not? You keep saying that there's no check you won't write, Jerry. That's a check you can write that nobody can bound. Write one. Maybe in 4 years he will.
Michelle?
Don't be crazy. I
Right?
remember audibly gasping when I saw the first tweet that said basically he's, a front runner, or like it's almost a done deal, or whatever the exact language was. I remember audibly like taking a step back and gasping for air. And I think the reason being is because, when Mike McCarthy left, there were so many names that were thrown out there and that were thrown around. And of course, a lot of those names were also names being considered for other head coaching vacancies. But even at the beginning, like Brian Schottenheimer was never really mentioned, just as Mike Zimmer was never really mentioned. And I think that was kind of understandably so, because of the product that we had just seen them put on the field in the last 17 weeks. So when I first saw that he was being considered, and we know from the time it was being reported that he was really like interviewing to the time that it was like, oh, he's basically got this deal in hand, that was a very short time frame, relatively speaking. And so I just remember thinking, wow, this is, and I said this earlier, but this is really what it's come to. You go from, and I know Jerry didn't hire Tom Landry, but like you go from that to this is where we're at now. And I just feel like you can't really claim all the things that you want to claim and then back it up with the actions that you've been backing it up with for so long now. And I felt like this was a time where, there wasn't really like a leading candidate that would have been a home run in this coaching cycle. Like the guys that you said earlier, Joe, the guys that were the big names, the coordinators that were cool and hot. They don't have any proven head coaching success. It's not like Andy Reid was, available to bring in to Dallas, and not that he would, but you know what I mean? There was no real home run hire available in this coaching cycle. But
You're right.
even with that in mind, to choose the guy you did, it just sends such a statement. And no matter what, lip service he does from really here on out, or specifically on Monday when they explain this hire, I think the action here sends a stronger message than whatever statement he gives. And I just guess I, at some point, wonder if the brand that he has done such an incredible job building. I mean, the Dallas Cowboys are who they are because of what Jerry's done and because of the players that he had early on and because of all of the winning that they did, especially in the time frame they did it, right? Like Dallas was kind of the epicenter of all that was cool and happening. And the Cowboys were a big part of that. So we can't discredit that piece, but I feel like what we've seen in the more recent years, and specifically at a time like this where you can make a statement, the statement he chose to make was an interesting one that I would say was shocking, but is it really shocking? No. At the end of the day, no. It fits.
Unfortunately, it's not shocking at all.
Right.
I think the statement it sends to me, you guys, is we're fine with status quo. That's what they went with. And unfortunately for Cowboys fans, what status quo is. It's dysfunction, it's disappointment, it's hopes that will be raised and dashed. That's what we've seen for 30 years. And when I try and think about the systemic deficiencies that could cause something like this, I have to go back to the past. Jerry Jones bought this franchise for $140 million. It's now worth more than $10 billion. He took a risk, and the risk has paid off. I think about back then some of the free agent moves that he made that paved the way for Super Bowls, when he would sign a guy like Deion Sanders, when he would sign a guy like Charles Haley. I mean, risky moves, big money moves. When they signed Deion Sanders, Jerry and Steven got into it physically. Jerry jokes about being up against the wall because Steven was trying to figure out, all right, how do we make this work? Because he was the capologist at the time, right? These were risky, bold, dynamic moves that brought back championship results. And what we've seen over the last several years, you guys, especially the 20 years I've been here, is a franchise that continually gets more and more conservative with the moves they make. I think about free agency. It always feels like they're always shopping at Kohl's and Marshall's when they're the most valuable franchise in the world, and they should be shopping at Neiman Marcus. And they just don't, right? And Mike, I think you eloquently talked about the coaches. That's the biggest issue I have. There is no salary cap with coaches, right? That's one place where you could take all that local revenue that your adoring fans give you and put it back into the product. Because I do think that would serve the brand well. But for whatever reason, they don't want to do it. They don't. And this is what we're left with. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think this will work, but I certainly hope I'm wrong. And I hope Jonah thinks that I am wrong as well. No. Can Jonah hear us, or do you still have the earpiece in?
I've got the earpiece out. You guys look great. Mike, less so. You look like Rudolph, my boy. Sorry. We've got to get Mike a new place.
It's cold out here, buddy.
No, you look so cold. My final thoughts. It's probably in line with what a lot of Cowboys Nation is feeling like. You got to be kidding me. This is the same kind of hire that we've had over the last 20 years. I'm trying to think positively here and hope, like Joe mentioned, that we're all wrong. There are a lot of coaches getting hired in the NFL right now to be head coaches that are coming in with incredible expectation. Ben Johnson, Liam Cohen.
Think about Liam Cohen.
Yeah, all these guys who
Me and
are
Cohen okey doke the league this week.
presumably supposed to be these offensive geniuses that are going to, lead teams to Super Bowls. They're coming in with a lot of hype. Schottenheimer might be the least hyped coach hire in this entire cycle. So he's got
ever
going for him. So that's great.
It was Chan Gailey.
The only problem is he's got the pressure of the last 29 years weighing on him now, and that's hard for any head coach, and it's hard, especially when you have a front office that continues to undermine those coaches at every turn. So let's see what this offseason does in terms of free agency and drafting, and that will probably give us a better idea.
Good stuff.
Strong final thoughts from one Jonah Javad.
I am hyped, and I didn't even have my 7th coffee of the day.
Yeah, you look hyped. You look like you're ready to go.
This is the face of somebody who really didn't want to have to spend all weekend checking his phone to see if this was going to.
Nice. Yeah. Good point. It's a very good point made by you. I like it. Listen, you guys.
Yeah. Leslie, very nice.
What's that?
The paternity leave beer. That's or soon to be.
I haven't. This beard is as old as the Cowboys coaching search. I have not shaved since the day Mike McCarthy was let go.
I'm just glad
that was my second to last day of work.
Hair is possible for you. This is great news. Anyway,
yes.
Seeing you all.
All right, thanks so much, Jonah, and thanks you guys, Michelle, Mike, thanks for hanging out in the cold. Appreciate that.
I'll survive it.
The final thing I'll say about this whole thing is I don't think it's going to change. I think it might get worse. We know that part of the other big issue with the Dallas Cowboys is the perception that Jerry, by his mere presence and the way he treats his organization, undermines his head coaches. Unfortunately, I think that will only continue with this kind of hire. I hope it changes. I hope I'm wrong. But listen, that's just the way I see it. All right, you guys. So, yeah, let's have a good weekend. We'll be ready to roll on Monday morning at 11 with the press conference. But right now, stick on WFAA Plus because we got plenty more reaction coming your way. We've got our friends from Locked On Cowboys. They've got their instant reaction. And then we've got All City Dallas as well. So we're taking you well into the night talking about Brian Schottenheimer, the 10th head coach of your Dallas Cowboys. But that'll do it for the WFAA sports team. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you guys down the road. Have a great weekend.
See y'all in March.